The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Forbes, for 5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you. Madam Attorney General, thank you for being here today. And I know you know well that the mission, one of the parts of the mission of the U.S. Department of Justice is to ensure public safety against threats, foreign and domestic. And I have a couple of news articles, and I know that we don't treat them for the truth of what's always in them, but we have to pay attention to them. One of them was Fox News that talked about ISIS having certain terror cells in 15 states and targeting those states. And then one where we're told by CBS that their CBS News national security correspondent was reporting that the Pentagon was notifying various soldiers who had appeared on lists and neighborhoods and cities that had been targeted by ISIS throughout Virginia, and were actually trying to get the police to increase patrols in these particular neighborhoods of these cities. And my question to you is, would you not conclude that it would be reasonable to conclude that if terrorists were brought from Guantanamo Bay to a particular city in the United States, that it would be reasonable to conclude that that could increase the likelihood that one of those cities could be placed on one of these lists, be it from ISIS leadership or some domestic ISIS copycat in the United States?
Well, Congressman, I'm certainly not able to speculate as to what a detainee may or may not do if they were in the U.S.
Let me correct that, Madam Attorney General, because you apparently didn't understand my question. I'm not talking about what the detainee would do. I'm talking about if you brought terrorists from Guantanamo Bay and located them in a particular city in the United States, would it not be reasonable to conclude that that might enhance the likelihood that that city could be placed on one of these targeted lists?
With respect to the list that you refer to, I'm not aware of the source of the...
I'm not asking that. I'm saying you know that there are lists that are around. Do you not, are you disputing that you have no knowledge that there are even any of these allegations of lists around the country today?
Well, Congressman, with respect to the matters that you've mentioned regarding the Fox News report, as I indicated, I'm not aware of their research. So
you're not aware that there are any lists in the United States today that target particular cities or states by ISIS or someone claiming to be representative of ISIS?
As I indicated, with respect to the first article that you mentioned...
No, any of them. I'm talking about any of the lists, Madam Attorney General. You're not aware of any of these lists?
Congressman, with respect to the list that you mentioned, I thought that you mentioned two, and perhaps
I'm saying any of these lists. My question for you is, wouldn't it be reasonable to conclude, if you brought terrorists from Guantanamo Bay and located them in a city, that it could very well enhance that city's being on one of these targeted lists? Yes or no? That's a pretty easy question. If you disagree with that, you can say no. If you agree with it, yes.
Well, Congressman, I thought you were referring to the service members who were on the list.
I'm making it clear. Any list that targets a city or state in the United States, if you bring terrorists from Guantanamo Bay, wouldn't it be reasonable to conclude that that can enhance that city's ability to be on one of those targeted lists?
I think there are any number of factors.
Would you not agree that that would be a factor that would enhance that ability?
I think there are any number of factors.
Would that be a factor?
There are any number of factors.
But you would disagree that that would be one of those many number of factors?
Congressman, I don't agree or disagree. I say that there would be any.
So then you, as the Attorney General of the United States, you do not have an opinion whether or not bringing terrorists from Guantanamo Bay and locating them in the city would have any capability at all of putting that city on a hit list by ISIS? You don't even have an opinion on that?
Congressman, I think there are any number of factors.
I'm asking you, would that be one of those factors?
I believe I've indicated there'd be any number.
No, you've indicated you wouldn't answer the question. And Madam Attorney General, I think that's atrocious that you don't even have an opinion of that. Let me ask you this, then, in the limited time I have, if you'll answer this question. You talk about data. We have certain of these events in Ferguson and Baltimore that you'll have an event and that will escalate into violence, and you talked about the police. Have you attempted to gather any information about outside organizations that may come from outside the community that may come into those communities and also escalate that violence?
We do gather information on individuals as well as
Do
organizations.
you
who are
have a
involved in
report that you can provide to this committee of your investigation and what that has included with a list of those organizations?
Congressman, we do not generate a report. What I was indicating was that in our review, if a matter is referred to us, particularly if there was a violent issue.
Now, I'm not talking about whether it's a
look at
crime. Do you have
individuals who are
any
involved in
information
that.
as to whether or not you talked about police escalating the violence? Do you have any information you can supply this committee that these outside groups may be coming in and also escalating that violence?
Congressman, the reports that we do would not focus solely on one factor.
So you
They would
haven't
focus
focused
on a
at all
host
on
of
outside
factors.
groups that could come in and escalate the violence?
Sir, if a matter is brought to our attention, it would come under our review.
But you haven't done any.
We don't have a report for you on that, sir.
But have you done any investigation?
Sir, if a matter is brought to our attention, it would come under our review.
Well, Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back without getting a single answer to a single question we posed.
As is the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, thank you so very much. General Lynch, thank you so very much for your service. And might I as well thank your staff, who have always been responsive to me in particular and to the members of this committee as we've tried to work toward justice for the people of the United States. I just want to, as I begin my questioning, say to you, I apologize. There are going to be pointed questions that if I can get yes or no, and we'll work on it, will be helpful so that I can get through them. As I do so, let me offer to the people of France, again, our deepest sympathy. This committee in particular is well aware of the impact of terrorism. Our subcommittee on crime is a subcommittee that is crime, terrorism, homeland security, and investigations. And so I offer it to the people of France, and certainly we stand united with them as the Justice Department, through the President of the United States, have been already working. To that point, I have a headline that says U.S. Justice Department working with French authorities after attacks, which is a good thing. And I say that because there's been a massive race by various states to make pronouncements of blocking Syrian refugees, people seeking asylum, and I understand the fear. I hope that we do not operate under fear. But my question is your confidence in procedures, and I would suggest that there be an interagency task force, as I hope that we will have a task force either out of this committee, Judiciary Committee on Paris, or either, I know that there's one recommended by the majority, but that we will have one that is bipartisan on this issue to be helpful to the administration. Do you feel confident in our processes as a partner to this process of being able to discern who amongst those suffering people would be a bad guy? I understand we're doing 10,000. I think that's the number the President has offered. Do you perceive your processes to be assured and sure?
Thank you, Congressman. And I do look forward to continuing this dialogue with you on this important point. We do have robust screening measures in place. They include not just databases, but also individual interviews, biometric data. We gather all relevant information about refugees from all countries because our first goal is the protection and safety of the American people, as well as carrying out the compassionate nature also of the American people.
And you feel comfortable if a terminology was used that you would certify that you could be confident on those that you processed, that you would use every measure to certify their non-intent to do harm in this country?
Certainly we would use every measure, as we always do, to ensure that those who are allowed into the country would not pose a threat to the American citizens.
I look forward to working with you. Let me move on to law enforcement and emphasize that obviously they become more important in these times, and we thank them for their service. But we also know, and I think your testimony earlier said that we are better when they are better. What is your thought? We introduced the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act, which includes a provision on data collection, but it also includes provisions on accreditation that the National Association of Police Chiefs have always supported. What do you think the importance of having departments subject themselves to accreditation, determining best practices, and helping them as well as the American public?
Congresswoman, in my discussions with law enforcement across the country, I have found them eager for assistance in sharing best practices. I've also found them eager for recognition of their professionalism, and accreditation is one way to do that. I think there are a number of ways to do that. Certainly, we in the Department are working with a number of the police organizations to try and develop consistent and national standards on data collection, and we rely heavily on their expertise for guiding those standards. And we would look to start with that same process with regard to any move toward accreditation also. I have found that law enforcement, frankly, is focused on professionalism and focused on spreading those best practices as best they can.
Let me do this so that my chairman will not gavel me. Let me quickly raise 3 points. Sentencing reform and the value of reducing mass incarceration, legislation that will reduce the treatment of juveniles and put it in a positive. I'd like you just to make overall comment on that. And then the idea of no-fly for foreign terrorists, meaning those who've gone to the fight, being particularly discerned before coming back into the United States. If I could get that, and then let me close on these 3 points, if I could, please, which are very important. I know that I'm leaving out some important points that I wanted to make. The voting rights, you already had a question on that, but isn't it more efficient on a pre-clearance approach such that it might be more helpful for us to reinstate that pre-clearance because it'll be more efficient? And I'm going to give you these 3 cases, if I can meet with your staff on them, are really a blatant miscarriage of justice. Sandra Bland case, that we have not had a response from the Justice Department. The case of Robbie Tolan, that went all the way up to the Supreme Court and indicated he had been mistreated. He lived and was shot by an officer on his driveway. And then a nonviolent person that is in the state prison of Texas with a life sentence for a nonviolent drug offense, first offense. It's almost unbelievable. So I would like you to answer just the questions that I just gave you, and these ones about the cases. I would like to meet as soon as possible with your staff on these issues.
I look forward to continuing to work with you on those important issues. Certainly with respect to voting rights, the pre-clearance remedy was one that we found to be not just effective but efficient. And we felt that it was a way in which to engage with jurisdictions as they contemplated changes to their laws and prevent them from going down a road that would have disenfranchised their citizens. Certainly, we felt that it was efficient and much less costly than litigation. It is an important part of the Voting Rights Act, and we certainly support the efforts to restore the pre-clearance remedy to the Voting Rights Act.
And I said juvenile justice, clemency, and juvenile justice, juvenile justice, I'd ask you to do juvenile justice, prison reform, and the sentencing reform, reducing mass incarceration, the value of that.
Certainly, with respect to...
The time of the gentlewoman has expired, but the witness can answer the question.
I thank the chairman for his indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to sentencing reform, we feel that it's a vital measure that recognizes that while we put measures in place several years ago designed to protect the American people, as we look back on those measures, we see the collateral consequences that it did, not just to citizens, but to communities. And we also are able to evaluate with the passage of time whether or not those lengthy sentences were the most effective way to deal with the offenders that they tended to sweep up. So certainly as a part of an overall review of our criminal justice system to make sure it is always as efficient and fair as possible, sentencing reform has an important role to play in that, and the Department is supportive of not just this committee's efforts, but Congress' efforts in that regard.
And we'll look forward to meeting with your staff, hopefully this week, about these cases that I've mentioned, including Sharonda Jones.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.